Welcome to the webinar Open Access in Practice. My name is Cecilia and I work as a communication officer at Stockholm University Library. This four-part presentation is held by experts from various support functions at Stockholm University. The event is a part of the International Open Access Week, which gives us a great opportunity to highlight the need of open access to science. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Sofie Wenström. The show is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia. I will start to talk about open publishing. I think publishing is what many people do at the university. So we start with the supposedly easy part. I'm not sure if it is. And I'm also going to give a bit of a background to the question why we are working on this. The open access movement started in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And the problem was that publishers kept increasing prices and kept content from researchers locked in behind their paywalls. This created inequalities in access to information, and it was therefore important for universities and research organizations to start thinking about how we share things. The term sharing is caring started as a part to address the network activity that many researchers participate in, like in, for example, conferences or online spaces, but also journals, academic journals. And what we see as a result is an increased dissemination of research all over the world, and people who share things openly will get more readers than they used to have. In September this year, Stockholm University adopted an open science policy. It was adopted by the president, and the policy aims to make the research output, and output in this sense is a wide term, including research data, publications, even lab notebooks where applicable. And what we want to do is to make content from Stockholm University findable, accessible, and reusable and interoperable, so that the information about the content can travel all over the world. This is called an abbreviation called FAIR, which you will see and again in these policy documents. This open science policy applies to all employees, so not just researchers, but also technical and administrative staff. There are 6 goals and a more elaborate plan with responsibilities on who should implement what in this science policy. There are, of course, work in progress. So our policy is a part of a bigger picture, which in our case starts at EU level. So EU has had a policy for open science since 2016, and they are working with this in different instances. My colleagues will talk more about other initiatives later on, but for example, they have developed a service called European Science Cloud, which is a collaboration across European research organizations to help share data and publications. The granting organization Horizon Europe grants, they require open publishing of results. The Swedish government came with propositions in both 2016 and 2020, and the goal for Sweden is that all Swedish and government-funded research should be open by 2026, which is not too long ago. The Swedish National Library is responsible for measuring and promoting open access, so they make reports on how we do in terms of openness. They also have a joint platform for Swedish journals called Publicera. They also host the BIBSAM consortium, which is a collaboration of Swedish research universities, where they negotiate agreements with publishers on how to publish open. My colleague Frida will talk about this a little bit later in this webinar. The Swedish Research Council is responsible for coordinating work with open data since 2017. And my colleagues Lisa and Maria will talk more about open data in a short while. Okay, so this openness thing, if we're aiming towards a fully open landscape by 2026, where are we now? This is a graph that shows the development of open access articles coming from research at Stockholm University from 2012 to 2021. And as you can see to the right of your screen, We are now at approximately 73% open. When in 2012, we were at 24%. So this has increased, but you see at the top, there's still quite a few publications that are not available in the open. But openness then, how do we define it? Well, there is a kind of a strict definition. So it doesn't just mean posting something online, a PDF or whatever. That is not necessarily open. Open material cannot be put behind a password wall, so it has to be open for everybody without registering, and there should be no barriers to download digital material. The author and creator needs to keep the copyright, and we are using licenses that shows the reader how they can use, share, and sometimes adapt the content that they are looking at. The complete work should be available, so not just the abstract or an excerpt counts as open access. The licensing, I'm not going to go into this in detail. I just want to show you the picture. So there is a licensing package. This is developed by an international collaboration between institutions and copyright holders and a lot of stakeholders. The licenses are in a scale from more open to more closed, so that you as an author or creator can control how other people use your material. It is very important that when you publish something that is supposed to be open access, you have to adopt one of these licenses, and you as an author or creator can choose which license is mostly suitable for you. Publishers may or may not offer all or some of these licenses, so do read the fine print when you're signing publishing agreements. So where do you publish open? Well, in our world, the author makes the decisions about where to publish. So the library doesn't decide, or the president of the university doesn't decide. It's the author themselves that decides where to disseminate their work. And with this task, it is also important that you become a conscious consumer when you pay for open access. I'll come back to that in a short while. And also, of course, it is important that you adhere to good research ethics, so that this open paradigm doesn't mean any quality breach or anything in terms of the research presented. My colleague Sarah will talk in a little while about research ethics, so stay tuned to listen more about that and what Stockholm University can do to help you with this. But one thing that I would like to send with you, a practical tool, is that you should research your target journals or publishers to avoid pitfalls. And there is a resource for this called Think Checks a Bit. This is a website which is a collaboration between publishers and library organizations and other stakeholders. And we have developed a tool where you can use a checklist. It's available in several languages as well, for both books and chapters and journals. So researchers can go to this website, use the checklist when they are vetting a publisher or a journal where they would like to publish or submit their work. Very neat. So this thing, I'm talking about paying for publishing. So that is what happens in an open access world. We still want the services from the publishers, but we're changing the way we're paying for them. So we're moving from subscriptions where we subscribe to published material to processing charges where we pay for publishing. And this charge usually follows the author or the corresponding author of material. Of course, this also means new business models and agreements with publishers. So the library is responsible for negotiating and overviewing this new business world we're living in. You can always contact your library and ask them to help you navigate through all this. And we will guide you a little bit about it today as well. So we can give you financial support. It's at Stockholm University Library. We have national institutional agreements with publishers. There's a library fund for other open access publishing. The publishing of open access books is sold on a case-by-case basis. So here it's also important to contact your department and ask them what kind of funding is available for you. Last but not least, we have Stockholm University Press, which is an open access publisher. We do peer-reviewed books and journals, and we've been around since 2015, approximately 2014. And we try to deliver a cost-effective publishing service for all authors and editors. And we make sure that the books and journals that they publish is disseminated globally and locally. And we help authors to find their audience. So far, we've published 48 books, or well, we will have published 48 books by the end of the year. There's 2 still in print. And then approximately 12 journals that we host on our platform. Last year, we had about 150,000 unique book and chapter downloads, and approximately 240,000 unique article downloads. And this is, of course, an increasing amount as we see more and more people moving to online services. And you're more than welcome to contact us at Stockholm University Press if you have any questions about how to publish with us, or what kind of books we do, or what kind of journals we do, or if you have a journal that you would like to be working with us, you're more than welcome to contact us. So you can reach us at the address publish@su.se. We're also online at Twitter, where we usually find a big audience for our publications. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so I will try to move back a little bit and talk about the technicalities. So my colleague Frida will talk about the agreements with publishers that allow you to publish open access. So I won't get into that. But one thing that I would like to do is to go back to this image about the licensing. I would like to say that this licensing can be added to any digital material. It can be added to a book, digital book, a web page, an article, or a data set. So the same licensing can apply to all of these types of outputs. It's also important to note that this license can also be added to images, to movie clips. For example, YouTube is using the Creative Commons license for anything that's published on their platform. So it's a good idea to look into the resources we have about this. And of course, there are resources at webben, where you can read more about these licenses and how to use them. Another thing that I would like to get into is, sorry, wrong picture, where we publish. Yes, somebody has raised a hand. The thing is that there is an idea that we will move away from being dependent on the journal as a brand to disseminate our research, but rather the research itself should talk for itself, since that is how we find the information these days. We search for articles and so on. So for example, it's not only articles in journals, but it could also be something called preprints or open access books or any other open information that you disseminate. So it's important to think about where you publish, but also how you publish and what you publish. So I would like to say that as an end to my talk. And I would like to hand over to the next speaker.
Welcome to the second session of the webinar Open Access in Practice. I am here to talk to you about how to publish your research data. My name is Lisa Olsson, and I've been working in the research data management team at Stockholm University for 2.5 years now. Our team supports you in handling, storing, publishing, and preserving your research data. And we also give advice on open science and fair data. If nothing else, this is what I want you to take away from these 15 minutes. There is a requirement, as Sophie mentioned, to publish the data that underpins your scholarly publications by 2026 in Sweden. Not all data can and should be made open access, but all data should be made as open as possible and as closed as necessary. And the requirement to publish data openly is part of the open science movement to make research more transparent, reproducible, and reusable. Open data is about conducting robust research, making efficient use of already collected data, and making more data more discoverable to others to enable new research. And I also want you to take away that it's recommended that you formally publish your data in a suitable data repository for data publishing to make data its own publication. If you publish and describe your data well, you increase the chances that anyone would be able to access and reuse your data in the future. But perhaps of most relevance to you, there is personal gain in publishing your data, which I will get into next. Data publishing requires a bit of effort, but it helps keep your data more organized and accessible to yourself. Details about data and data collection soon gets forgotten or lost after the publication of an article, for instance, as is shown in this graph. Hard drives can collapse, people quit, and documentation is lost. However, if you publish your data, they remain documented and accessible to you, but also to others. And this is handy should you or anyone else want to repeat or learn more about your research down the line. Also, when an article is linked to its published data, there is never any confusion about which data underpins the article, and the drawn conclusions in the article can be verified. Data publishing is also a way to display your work in a fuller, more efficient and cohesive sense, because the most important outcome of your research might not turn out to be your articles, but rather your data or something else like code or your reports. But if you formally publish your data, they become citable and potentially meriting. When data are formally published, they receive a unique persistent identifier, such as a DOI. And thanks to this identifier, the data become discoverable independently of your article. But they can also be linked to the article and to your other research outputs, so that it is easy for others to find and navigate through your body of work. The general advice on how to publish data is in a data repository for data publishing. We encourage you to investigate the practices in your field. Perhaps there is a commonly used domain-specific repository that would help describe or display your data particularly well. There may be certain platforms or data journals or other established practices in your field that you need to adhere to. So we encourage you to investigate those. The timing of when to publish data is flexible, but we recommend that you prepare to publish your data as you get ready to submit an article, so that you can link to the data from the final version of the article. Journal editors or reviewers may want to see your data before you publish with them, so it's great to be prepared at the point of article submission with either a DOI for the data or with a link for private review if you haven't published your data, but you want to show the editor that you have the data ready for publication. And this is something a data repository can offer, a DOI or a private link for review. Our team, the research data management team, helps provide support and improve your data publication when you publish in one of these 4 institutional data repositories: SND, Dataverse, Figshare, or Zenodo. These are considered generalist repositories and are, as such, suitable for most types of data. re3data.org is a registry of data repositories if you want to explore other repository options. The reasons for publishing data in a data repository are manifold. First, a repository makes your data a publication in its own right, so that others can find and download data easily. A good repository provides your data with a DOI or another persistent identifier, and is also indexed to make your data findable through normal search engines. A repository also prompts you to describe your data well, how data were collected, what variables mean, and perhaps what software is needed for data to be read. This information helps others understand and handle data correctly. Different data have different needs, and a domain-specific repository might help describe your data in better detail. For instance, in my own field, psychology, it might be relevant to be able to easily discern if data are from experimental, clinical, or survey studies, for instance. And archaeological data benefits from descriptions that allow for filtering on place of data collection or age in history. Other data, like archaeological findings or maps or climate data, for instance, they may need some they may need to be visually displayed in other ways than perhaps spreadsheet data are displayed. So you need to choose a repository that helps describe your data and display your data particularly well for what your purposes are. Repositories also prompt you to choose a license for your data. As Sophie mentioned, you have to apply a license to your data to specify how others can and cannot reuse your data and how you want to be cited. The CC BY license is a commonly used open license. Now, these features together help make your data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, or FAIR, if you've already heard that term. FAIR data are much more sustainable and potentially useful than data that is shared upon request or as journal supplements or appendices. And this is because journals can cease to exist, PDFs and links can be broken. FAIR data also reach a wider audience than informally shared data do when you share data between colleagues. And one recent study actually showed that in practice, it is rare to get access to data when you request it from researchers. So in short, a data repository makes your data a citable publication, potentially meriting on a publication on its own right that is easier for anyone to find, understand, and reuse in the future. For legal, ethical, commercial, and sometimes practical reasons, not all data can be published openly. And these are some examples of such data. Personal or sensitive personal data, data that someone else owns intellectual property rights to, data containing commercial or financial information, or data that are simply too large to publish in a data repository. If you handle large or sensitive data and want to make them as open as possible and as closed as necessary, you create a metadata post, a descriptive post about your data in a data repository without uploading the actual data files. And that's how you make large or sensitive data as open and fair as possible and as closed as necessary. This slide is to give you an example of what research data can look like when you publish them. This is a snapshot from the data repository Figshare, where the authors Berkovich and Perakis published data earlier this year. They titled their data Nano-focused X-ray photon correlation spectroscopy. And you can see the usage statistics on how many times the post has been viewed. The authors in this post uploaded 6 files, seen at the top of the page. The first being an example notebook to show how to load and use the other 5 files, the datasets. And the datasets are said to underpin figures and example code described in a published article. And there's a link to that article here. And there is a description of each dataset. And there is also a DOI generated by the repository that will permanently link to these data. If you scroll this actual data post, you find more information. You can see a link to analysis codes published in GitHub. You can see a list of keywords applied to the data and its usage license. There could also be links to really any other resources that help explain the data. And all of this information, anything you see here, is called metadata, information about the data, which helps put the data in proper context and makes them more sustainable and useful. So we really want to encourage you to describe your data well when you publish in a data repository, because you don't know in what context your data might become useful in the future. So describe it richly for any potential future users. And finally, make sure to mention the DOI of your data in the article or the chapter or book that the data underpins to connect your work. In articles, this is often done in the data availability statement. This makes it easy for others to identify the underpinning data. You should also mention the DOI of the article in your data publication. If your article is not yet published when you publish data, you can always add information like a DOI of an article later. A data post can be updated later, and it's under your control. As you publish the data, you can update it if you need to. And by linking your data and your other research outputs, you benefit not only your work, but you also contribute to the increased access to research findings for your research community, as well as the public. You can access all of our support at su.se/publish-data. Go there to log into the data repositories for which we can provide support. Discover any upcoming webinars in the researchers calendar at su.se/researchers. And of course, you are most welcome to contact us with any questions you might have. Thank you for listening, and the webinar now continues with the next session.
Okay, I think it's 12:30 now, so I'm beginning this third session of the webinar, Open Access in Practice. So the topic of this session is how to publish openly and ethically. And my name is Sara Belfrag, and I work at the ethics support function at the Office for Research Engagement and Innovation Services at Stockholm University. So as you probably know, and as you've heard in the previous presentations, one of the guiding principles of the open science paradigm is to publish as open as possible and as closed as necessary. But the question then is, of course, what that means. We've heard a little bit about it, and I will expand on that a little bit more. And we will also look at how to combine ethical considerations with open publishing, and we will shed light on the relation between openness and good research practice. And at the end, we will mention some broader ethics issues that the open science sort of accentuate, let's say. So first, on the relation between openness and good research practice, one of the central guiding documents on good research practice or research integrity is the ALEA Code, or the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. And the Stockholm University Research Integrity and Ethics Policy refers to and relies to this ALEA code. So this ALEA code is important for us and for the research that we carry out at Stockholm University. The ALEA code states that researchers should ensure that access to data is as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So in other words, this is exactly the open science motto. So we can see that openness as well as protection are inherent parts of good research practice. And now we will look at why this is so. First, and this is to repeat a bit what Lisa has already touched upon, and also Sophie previously. Why should we publish as open as possible? There are several related reasons. Sharing data enables the review of research and hence the validity of results, and in a larger perspective, the robustness of science and the knowledge it produces. Because of course, the whole point of research is to produce knowledge. If it doesn't, or if we cannot be sure of it, then the whole rationale behind doing research weakens. This in turn affects the reputation and credibility of science and the willingness to spend resources on research and in other ways contribute to its advancement. And this leads to the third point. To reuse data is efficient. It means that we use our resources in a responsible way. Otherwise, it would simply be wasteful. So we can say that we owe this to a society which dedicates resources on research to spend and use the resources well. So these 3 points focus on research as the collective and socially valuable enterprise as it is. And the last point focuses on individual researchers and what's important and beneficial to them. Because to be able to present your data is a good way to protect yourself if you were ever to be accused of research misconduct, given, of course, that there are no grounds for such accusations. And we will come back to this issue of the importance of being able to show your data if your research is being questioned. So these are a few arguments for why access to data should be as open as possible. Now, let's turn to the reasons why data should be as closed as necessary. So simply put, this has to do with the fact that data may be sensitive and they may cause harm if shared openly. And in fact, though this is particularly true of sharing of data, it can also be said of sharing of results or other research outputs. There are many kinds of ways that make data sensitive. Of course, we have those data that are defined as sensitive in the law, the so-called special categories of personal data listed in the GDPR. And these categories include personal data on racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, membership of a trade union, health, sex life or sexual orientation, genetic data, biometric data that is being used to uniquely identify a person. So this is the list of categories of personal data that are considered sensitive in the law. Of course, it may be difficult to determine whether a specific piece of information that you may have belongs to any of these categories. And we will not dig into that now, but that is often a tricky question. We will now just state this is the list of sensitive personal data in the law. Of course, we also have data that may be sensitive in other ways. There are other personal data that may be considered sensitive. Information about us that we find that is stigmatizing, that we might find shameful or wish to hide from the world. So data of that kind may be sensitive in another way. Data and other research outputs may also be sensitive if they risk causing harm to groups or to society. Other reasons for limiting access to data may be that they result from animal research or from genetic resources. So this has to do with the Nagoya Protocol that you may be familiar with. Data may also be sensitive because they may have military applications. So again, there are a variety of reasons why data should not always be shared openly. Now we will look at a case illustrating these conflicting interests, namely a study carried out at Gothenburg University. And this research project studied neuropsychiatric conditions in children, and it involved a lot of sensitive data about these kids and their families. And this case is known as the Gillberg study. As it happened in this case, other researchers questioned the results of this research and asked for access to the data in order to check basically whether the work was valid or not. So they wanted to investigate, are these results correct? But in this case, the researchers behind the study denied access to data. They didn't want to share it, and they refused, and they argued that they had to protect the privacy of their research subjects. And furthermore, they had promised their research subjects that they would never give access to the data to anyone outside of the research group. And they also said that if they were to break that promise made to the research subjects, this would harm trust in research, and this would make it difficult to recruit participants for future research projects. So they denied giving access to the data to other researchers. And then a legal process followed where it was concluded that the researchers had to give access to the data, as these data are official documents, allmänna handlingar. And they should be made public according to law, offentlighetsprincipen. It was also noted in these legal proceedings that access could be given with restrictions. So they didn't need to give full access to all of the data to the whole world. They only needed to give to reveal enough of the material as to make it possible to review the research and validate the results. And in the end, colleagues of the responsible researcher claimed that they had destroyed the data, so there could be no access given to others to this data because it was allegedly destroyed, and they did this in order to protect their research subjects. And this led to the court finding these researchers, as well as university representatives, they were found guilty of malpractice, tjänstefel. So this case illustrates the tension between giving access to data and protecting it. And of course, the way things were done in this case were unfortunate. But what can we learn from it? What conclusions should be drawn? We can conclude a few important things. First, you really do have to strike a balance between these conflicting interests and handle data in an ethically defensible way, as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So you have to pay attention to both of these aspects already as you plan your research. We can also note that there are legal requirements restricting both how you can share and how you can protect the data. So it is not only up to you as a researcher to decide on this. And this in turn, of course, affects what promises you can make to research subjects. So you mustn't tell them that you will handle data in ways that you cannot, in fact, guarantee. And finally, we should underline that you can be open and share data in different ways. And this has already also been mentioned. It is not necessarily a matter of either or. You can share parts of your data, you can share information about the data without giving full access to all your data to the rest of the world. So it's not an either or thing. Now, before ending this presentation, we will look at the broader perspective a little bit. So as we've seen, there is a challenge in striking a balance between openness and protection of data, and also of protection of other kinds of research outputs. Furthermore, open science also brings along other challenges that need to be dealt with in a responsible way by the research community as a whole. And I'll mention two of these. First of all, how can we achieve real accessibility for all, also for resource-poor universities and for researchers who do not have access to expensive agreements with publishers, researchers who may lack resources both of accessing data and other research outputs, and to publish openly themselves, and hence fulfilling the open science requirements. So how can we make sure that open science is actually available for researchers in all kinds of situations? And the second challenge is how can we avoid creating new vulnerabilities and rendering ourselves dependent on actors, institutions, and companies? And I think of publishers, platform providers, data management tools that have other aims and agendas than we do. How can we make sure that our sharing of data and so on term and sustainable? So these questions show the importance of choosing your methods, platforms, and fora for publication with care. And as you've seen, the other presentations in this lecture help you do just that. Finally, if you have questions concerning research ethics or integrity issues, then you're most welcome to contact us, and you will also find more information on the web. So thank you for listening, and now it's time for the fourth session of this webinar.
My name is Frida Lundqvist, and I'm a license coordinator at Stockholm University Library. This session will focus on our publishing agreements as well as our OA fund in a general sense. And if you have any questions on a specific agreement, please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A, and my colleagues will help you. I will start by talking a bit about the different kind of open access journals. There's the hybrid journal, which is a journal that is funded both by APCs and subscription. And an open access article in a hybrid journal can either be gold, which is immediate open access, and which we favor in Sweden, but it can also be green open access, which is favored in other countries like Denmark. Green open access means that you can put your article in a local repository, like Diva, and usually it's not the finished article, it's an earlier version of it, quite often the submitted manuscript. There's also the gold or fully open access journal, which is a journal that is funded only by APCs, and also the diamond open access journal, which has no cost either for the reader or for the author. It's funded by other means. So what is an APC? Well, it's the cost of publication. What's included in the APC varies, but you can assume that peer review and editorial support is included. Other charges may apply, like cost for translations or cost related to the printed journals, such as extra pages or color charges. The library does not pay for these charges. We only pay for the APC. We also do not pay for post-publication open access or book publishing charges or BPCs. At the moment, we have over 30 agreements or other initiatives that includes open access publishing. Most of them are national agreements via the BIBSAM consortia, but we also have some local agreements as well. Most of these agreements are read and publish agreements or transformative agreements, as we prefer to call them, because they're not meant to be permanent. So what's included in a read and publish agreement? Well, there's the read part, which is access to locked content in all or most of a publisher's journals, and APCs of original research papers in the publisher's hybrid journals, and quite often also the gold open access journals. While original research papers are always included, other type of articles might not be, such as book reviews or letter to the editor. So if you have one of those articles, please make sure that they are included in the agreement you plan to use. Articles are included in the deal either due to acceptance date or submission date. So in order to find these articles or these journals that is included in our agreements, we have a search tool. You find it on our webpage on medveten webben. I will give you the address in the end of the session. Here you find information about the different journals included in our deals. You find them either on ISSN or the title. You can see their OA status here in the end. This is hybrid and this is a gold. You can see which CC BY license you can choose from. And if you follow this credit card link, you come to the page for the actual agreement, where you can find details about it, such as what kind of license you can choose, if it's a mission or acceptance date, which article types are included, and how to proceed as the corresponding author. We have a few conditions for being eligible for funding via our agreements. It's that the corresponding author should be affiliated with Stockholm University, and the Stockholm University must be stated as the corresponding author's affiliation in the article. We also prefer if you use your Stockholm University email at submission. This is not a requirement, but it makes it easier for the publisher to identify you as a Stockholm University author. We also have an open access fund that to support open access publication, and to be eligible for funding via our OA fund, the journal you plan to publish in has to be listed in directory of open access journals. This is a demand from our side to be able to avoid predatory journals. We have the same rule as we have with our publishing agreements. The corresponding author has to be affiliated with Stockholm University. Stockholm University is the affiliation in the journal article, and we cannot make reimbursements. This is a more practical thing, but that is the case. If you have one of these APCs that you want us to pay, we will like you to contact us via email. And when the publisher asks for the invoice details, at that point we can provide you with the correct invoice details, and then you can send us the invoice that then we will pay. If you already have done that, we can still fix that, but it will take a bit of time to make the invoice correct. And if you ever have been dealing with open access publishers, you know that they won't publish your article until they get paid. So if you contact us beforehand, everything will run more smoothly, and you will your paper will be published quicker. But as long as the invoice hasn't been paid, we can usually fix it. So if you want to learn more, please visit our webpage. We are on the staff pages or medveten webben under publication support. We also have short links, one in Swedish, which is su.se/apc, or the English version is su.se/english/apc. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at openaccess@su.se. Over to you, Cecilia.
Actually, we have a question in the Q&A if you want to answer it.
Yeah, sure.
Since we have a little bit of time over. Why is the corresponding author has to be affiliated with Stockholm University and not the first author?
The reason for the corresponding author is that the corresponding author is the one that corresponds with the publisher. So the publisher has the address and the contact with the corresponding author, and thus it's the corresponding author that is mapping to the universities with agreements. So that's the reason why it's the corresponding.
So that was all. Thank you, Frida, and thank you all for taking part in this webinar. If you have any questions on the topics we have talked about today, you can please make contact by email. You can see here all the contact info and links to the website for researchers support on this last slide. But if you want to check out, it's okay. I just want to say have a great day and goodbye.